Do you believe every corner of America holds affection for Trump? Perhaps it's time for a second look. Imagine entire states exhibiting what seems like a political allergy to the man. We're delving into regions where his appearances are met with jeers, his very name ignites demonstrations, and his policies are symbolically torn down. The world stage is constantly shifting, with numerous events unfolding globally. And today we're zooming in on a significant aspect of the American political landscape. Why do vast numbers of Americans harbor such intense animosity towards him? Is the root cause found in discussions about race, the dynamics of power, a history of perceived falsehoods, or is there something more fundamental at play? From bastions of liberal thought to unexpected political arenas, certain states didn't merely cast a blue vote. They seemed to take it personally. Stick with us as we explore the 10 U.S. states where the sentiment against Trump is palpable, and rest assured, they aren't keeping their opinions quiet. We'll break down the complex factors contributing to this phenomenon, and we'll have some concluding thoughts at the end of our journey. Stay tuned. Before we dive deeper, if you find this analysis insightful, please consider subscribing to our channel and giving this video a thumbs up. Your support is crucial for helping us continue to bring you in-depth content like this. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our audience around the globe. You won't comprehend the length some areas have gone to simply to repudiate him. Consider California, often dubbed the Golden State. It's renowned as the place where aspirations are realized. Unless, perhaps, your name is Donald Trump. Picture an environment where his every action is countered with resounding boos, widespread protests, and persistent calls for impeachment. This isn't merely a state opposing his agenda. It feels like a concerted effort to push him out entirely. California stands as a heartland for progressives, and what follows from that? It also emerges as the state exhibiting the most vocal and fervent resistance to his leadership style. From the tech behemoths nestled in Silicon Valley to the outspoken celebrities of Hollywood, Trump hasn't exactly received a warm embrace here. The divide between California's core values and his presidency is stark and profound. You might be surprised by the sheer depth of this chasm. One could assume a state as large and diverse as California might be politically fractured, but the sentiment appears remarkably unified in its rejection. This state hasn't leaned Republican in a presidential election since 1988. Coupled with Trump's specific policies concerning immigration, climate change, and health care, issues deeply resonant with many Californians, the gap only widens. His approach to environmental regulations, his stance on immigration enforcement, and his attempts to dismantle existing healthcare structures directly clash with the prevailing political and social ethos of the state. The cultural identity of California, emphasizing diversity, environmental consciousness, and social liberalism, finds itself fundamentally at odds with the brand of politics Trump represents. This deep-seated opposition manifests not just in voting patterns, but in continuous public discourse, legal challenges originating from the state, and the prominent voices from its influential cultural sectors consistently speaking out against his administration and potential return. The rejection isn't passive. It's an active, ongoing statement of values. Now, make sure you watch this video all the way through, because the insights build upon each other, and we'll be drawing some important conclusions at the end that you won't want to miss. Let's journey to the East Coast, to New York. Envision being from the very state where Trump constructed his business empire and where his entire public persona arguably began, only to witness your own populace consistently turn their backs. New York is intrinsically linked with the Trump name, the skyline dotted with buildings bearing his brand. He is, in many ways, a product of this state. Yet, the moment he stepped onto the national political stage, a profound shift occurred. It transformed into a full-blown confrontation with the city and state he once indisputably called home. The state that birthed his career now largely repudiates him. From the towering skyscrapers of Manhattan to the diverse streets of Brooklyn and beyond, Trump's particular brand of rhetoric simply doesn't resonate well here anymore. His policy decisions, particularly those affecting urban centers, immigration, New York being a major hub, and financial regulations have often been met with fierce opposition from state and city officials, as well as the general public. Here's a fascinating twist. You might expect the state that launched him to perhaps rally behind its native son, at least in some quarters. But the reality is quite different. New York has remained steadfast in its rejection of his political style and substance. It stands as one of the most overwhelmingly blue states in the entire Union. With every controversy, tweet, or policy announcement during his presidency, his image within New York seemed to only deteriorate further. His administration's attacks on New York's sanctuary city policies, for example, were particularly inflammatory, striking at the core of the city's identity as a welcoming place for immigrants. It's hardly surprising, then, that he faced boos and protests even at events held within his home state, a stark symbol of the disconnect between the man and the place that shaped him. The political landscape here is dominated by Democratic influence, and the cultural fabric, especially in New York City, leans heavily towards social liberalism, creating an environment inherently resistant to many of Trump's core tenets. Moving further north, we arrive in Massachusetts. What unfolds when a state celebrated for its progressive ideals, intellectual heritage, and deep-seated history rejects the individual positioned to lead the nation? Massachusetts provides a compelling case study. You're about to discover the extent of this rejection. The state has made its stance unequivocally clear. Donald Trump is not favored here. The intensity of the pushback against his policies might astound you. Massachusetts, historically a bastion of democratic power and liberal thought, voted overwhelmingly for Joe Biden in 2020, and the electoral numbers were truly staggering, reflecting a profound disconnect. The state is home to some of the nation's most prestigious universities, like Harvard and MIT, and centers of research and innovation. Trump's perceived attacks on science, education funding, and expertise itself did not sit well within this environment. From the very beginning of his political ascent, Trump's policies regarding healthcare, climate change action, and his consistent undermining of scientific consensus placed him squarely at odds with the prevailing values in Massachusetts. But here's the crucial point. This opposition wasn't confined to the coastal elites or university academics. Ordinary people in towns and communities across the state felt this dissonance too. Massachusetts voters didn't just disagree with Trump's policies. They seemed to fundamentally reject his divisive rhetoric and approach to governance. Policies like tax cuts perceived to favor the wealthy and the rollback of environmental protections ignited fury among Bay State residents. Interestingly, Massachusetts was among the first states to implement its own comprehensive healthcare system, a model that shared principles with the Affordable Care Act, the very system Trump sought to dismantle nationally. You might think a businessman like Trump would find some traction in a state with a strong economic base and numerous entrepreneurs, but the clash of values proved too significant. His vision for America starkly contrasted with what the majority in Massachusetts envisioned for their future. The state's political identity, deeply rooted in social progressivism and intellectualism, meant his approval ratings were destined to remain low. Let's consider Vermont, a state that prides itself on independence, progressive ideals, and a strong sense of community. How does such a place contend with a president whose style and policies often seem antithetical to everything it stands for? Vermont has consistently been at the forefront of resistance against Donald Trump. You might be taken aback to learn that even though Vermont is geographically small, it carries significant political weight in terms of its ideological stance. The state, with its population just under 700,000, has experienced a turbulent relationship with Trump's presidency, and the electoral results speak volumes. Bernie Sanders, Vermont's most renowned senator and a national figurehead for progressive politics, became a prominent face of the resistance movement against Trump. His supporters, deeply embedded within the state's political fabric, have been vocal and persistent in their opposition. However, the sentiment extends beyond Sanders' base. Vermont has solidified its disdain for Trump through consistent voting patterns and prevailing public opinion. In the 2020 election, Vermont went overwhelmingly blue, delivering a staggering 66% of the vote to Joe Biden. Similarly, in 2016, the state strongly favored Hillary Clinton by a significant margin. One might wonder why a state often perceived as rural and populated by farmers would reject Trump so decisively. But here's the surprising element. Vermont isn't just a blue state. It's a state deeply committed to specific principles. The state's repudiation of Trump is fundamentally rooted in its dedication to progressive values, particularly its strong commitments to social justice, universal health care access, and robust environmental protection. Consequently, Trump's attacks on these very issues, his stance on climate change, his approach to health care reform, and even his controversial rhetoric surrounding immigration, were met with little tolerance from Vermonters. While seemingly paradoxical given its rural character and predominantly white population, Vermont's progressive streak means that any political approach resembling Trump's divisiveness receives swift rejection. It's less about blind party loyalty and more about aligning with a president who reflects their core values. And for most Vermonters, Trump simply wasn't that leader. Now we turn our attention to Illinois. What outcome do you anticipate when you mix a vast, diverse population, a formidable Democratic stronghold centered in a major metropolis, and a comprehensive rejection of Trump's policies? The answer lies in the state of Illinois. You might be genuinely surprised by the unwavering firmness with which this state stands against him. From the energetic streets of Chicago to the quieter, more rural corners of the state, Trump's presidency encountered continuous pushback. The state's political landscape, heavily influenced by Chicago's Democratic machine, but also encompassing diverse suburban and rural perspectives, ultimately tilted strongly against Trump. And consider this: the state's political machinery hasn't shifted. In 2020, Illinois overwhelmingly backed Joe Biden, giving him a victory margin exceeding 17%. This decisive outcome made it abundantly clear that Trump's policies and political style did not resonate with the majority of Illinois voters. The state's urban centers, with their blend of blue-collar workers, university students, and professionals, displayed massive opposition to Trump's positions on immigration, his management of the economy, and his environmental policies. But the rejection wasn't limited to the cities. Even in more traditionally conservative rural areas, discontent grew and support eroded as his term progressed. People felt alienated by his rhetoric and unfulfilled promises, particularly concerning the revitalization of industries. Interestingly, despite Illinois having a history of more mixed political leanings in the past, Trump's rhetoric and actions seemed to solidify opposition, pushing the state further towards the Democratic Party. Even numerous Illinois Republicans began to distance themselves from his influence. What's perhaps most striking is that Illinois is home to some of the nation's most powerful labor unions. Trump's often antagonistic stance towards labor rights and his administration's attempts to weaken union protections only served to further infuriate Illinois voters, many of whom have strong ties to organized labor. For these workers, Trump's promises to revive manufacturing fell flat, and they felt betrayed. The rejection in Illinois wasn't merely political. For many, it felt deeply personal, fueled by a sense of outrage. Let's head back to the Pacific Northwest and examine Oregon. Picture a state known for its stunning natural beauty, fiercely independent spirit, progressive politics, and deep commitment to sustainability. Now, envision a president whose policies frequently clash with these core values. This sets the stage for Oregon's relationship with Donald Trump. Welcome to Oregon, where the opposition runs deep. You might be shocked by how staunchly this state repudiated Trump. Oregon, with its lush forests, environmentally conscious cities like Portland, and strong progressive values, has been a vocal opponent of his administration since the beginning. Trump's disregard for climate change science and his policies affecting public lands sparked intense resistance here. But guess what? It wasn't only the state's environmental stance that fueled this opposition. Oregon is also home to a burgeoning urban population that overwhelmingly supports progressive policies on issues ranging from health care to social justice. From Portland to Eugene, the state's cities are filled with people who reject Trump's views on health care, immigration, and social equality. In fact, in 2020, Oregon voted decisively for Joe Biden with a significant margin, further solidifying its stance against Trump. You might think Oregon's liberal reputation makes it a predictable opponent, but it's more than just a political leaning. It's a cultural rebellion against everything Trump represents. The state's population is relatively young, educated, and highly engaged politically, and they've made it clear they don't support a president who undermines the very issues they prioritize. What's even more surprising is how the state's stance on issues like homelessness, gun control, and police reform became rallying points for anti-Trump sentiment. Oregon was at the center of massive protests, particularly in Portland, against Trump's handling of racial justice issues in 2020. When Trump dispatched federal agents to Portland to quell protests, it only intensified the backlash, galvanizing opposition across the state. The city's residents, along with people throughout Oregon, didn't just disagree with Trump. They actively opposed his presence and influence, viewing his actions as an overreach of federal power and a violation of their community values. Finally, let's look at Washington state. What happens when a state on the West Coast, renowned for its booming tech industry, strong environmental activism, and decidedly progressive politics, decides it has fundamentally had enough of Trump? Washington has made its position crystal clear. It does not align with Trump's policies or his leadership style. You might be astonished to learn just how profoundly the state pushed back during his presidency. From the tech hub of Seattle to the agricultural lands east of the Cascades, this state rejected nearly everything Trump stood for. In the 2020 election, Washington delivered a resounding 58% of its votes to Joe Biden, sending an unambiguous message that Trump's divisive rhetoric and policies were unwelcome. But guess what? The opposition wasn't solely based on who they voted for. Washington's major cities are home to millions of tech workers, scientists, and environmentalists who found Trump's policies deeply troubling. His administration's rollback of environmental regulations and its dismissal of climate change science hit a state that prides itself on its green initiatives and natural resources particularly hard. You'd be surprised at the impact this had on Washington's residents. The state has been a leader in renewable energy and sustainable practices, and Trump's disregard for environmental protection was met with widespread outrage. And here's a surprising fact. Washington is home to some of the country's largest corporations, like Amazon and Microsoft. Trump's rhetoric on immigration, particularly concerning H-1B visas crucial to the tech sector, and his approach to trade sparked deep divisions and pushback from these influential companies and their employees. When Trump took a hard stance on these issues, companies that rely on international talent and markets didn't just remain silent. They actively pushed back. This is a state where innovation is paramount, and Trump's policies on technology and business didn't align with the ethos of the people driving it forward. You'd be shocked to know how much resistance came from ordinary Washingtonians, too. The state's political activism runs deep, and from climate change to healthcare to immigrant rights, Trump's administration failed to align with the core values of this state. The rejection was personal, felt by people who felt disrespected by his approach to social justice and racial equality. So, there you have it. A journey through 7 states where the opposition to Donald Trump was, and likely remains, incredibly strong. From the economic anxieties fueled by trade policies and attacks on labor, to the deep-seated rejection based on core values surrounding the environment, social justice, healthcare, and scientific integrity, these states painted a picture of significant political division within the United States. California's progressive identity clashed fundamentally with Trump's platform. New York, his home state, turned its back, fueled by policy disagreements and a cultural mismatch. Massachusetts, with its intellectual and liberal roots, found his approach to science and governance unacceptable. Vermont's independent and progressive spirit led to a swift rejection of his divisive politics. Illinois, a diverse state with a strong union presence, felt betrayed by his rhetoric and policies. Oregon's environmental consciousness and progressive urban centers generated fierce opposition. And Washington, a tech and environmental leader, saw his administration as fundamentally misaligned with its core values. These examples underscore the complex tapestry of American politics, where regional identities, demographic shifts, and deeply held values contribute to a landscape far more nuanced than simple red versus blue. The sentiment in these states wasn't just a fleeting reaction. It represented a profound disconnect with the direction Trump sought to take the country, a disconnect that continues to shape the nation's political discourse.